King Charles has delivered his first address to Parliament as monarch. He described it as a living and breathing instrument of our democracy and referenced Westminster's many connections with his mother, the late Queen.
That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall, and the reminders of medieval predecessors of the office to which I have been called.
MPs and peers rose to sing the national anthem, heralding the next stage of the journey for King Charles, who travelled to RAF Northolt for the short flight up to Edinburgh to join other royals as the Queen's coffin is conveyed along the city's Royal Mile. With a look at the events of another historic morning, here's our correspondent Fasma Manji.
Westminster Hall, the oldest building in Parliament. Its original site was built under William II in 1097, and it's heralded in monarchs ever since. This morning, parliamentarians gathered to mark the passing of the Queen and greet the King. It began with the entrance of the Yeomen of the Guard, the monarch's traditional bodyguards. Perhaps a reminder that the relationship with kings and Parliament hasn't always been smooth. In 1649, this was the very site where King Charles I was tried for treason and sent to his execution. Enter Charles III, accompanied by Queen Consort Camilla. This ceremonial pomp is the Constitution visualised, bringing together the Crown, the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
Your Majesty, even as we mourn the loss of our dear Queen, we and future generations will draw strength from her shining example. Your Majesty, on behalf of all the members of the House of Lords, I pledge my loyalty to you. We are proud and indeed humbled to welcome you as our King.
She sat in this historic hall, as you sit now, on many occasions. Some of those occasions were to celebrate milestones in her own reign. The addresses to celebrate her silver, golden and diamond jubilees shared a common thread, that our constitutional monarchy is a symbol of stability in an ever-changing world.
Having accepted their condolences, Charles III then made his first address to Parliament as King.
As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all. Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall, and the reminders of medieval predecessors of the office to which I have been called.
Quoting Shakespeare, he paid tribute to the Queen and pledged his own commitment to duty.
She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
From Wednesday at 5 p.m, the Queen will lie in state in this very hall until the following Monday at 6:30 a.m. Anyone will be allowed to visit, but the queues are expected to exceed 20 hours. Meanwhile, at Wellington Barracks, a full military rehearsal was taking place. a practice run to carry the Queen's coffin on a gun carriage. And after having appeared with his brother in an unexpected walkabout to meet mourners at the weekend, this morning Prince Harry issued a tribute to the Queen. Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful. You are already sorely missed not just by us, but by the world over. We now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III. The King then boarded a flight to Edinburgh from RAF Northolt. Soon he will be accompanying his mother and our former monarch on her final journey.
Well, our reporter Amelia Jen is in Westminster and joins us now. Amelia.
Well, you heard the new King there making an address from Westminster Hall, and it's to Westminster Hall that the coffin of the late Queen will travel on Wednesday. And this morning's service was really a reminder of its historical significance. It was the oldest building in the Palace of Westminster. The Lord Speaker spoke of how its walls were built 900 years ago. King Charles said that it was a reminder too of his medieval predecessors. But before the coffin does arrive here on Wednesday, it'll travel from Buckingham Palace up the Mall, through Horse Guards Parade and down Whitehall in a ceremonial procession attended by the royal family. There'll then be a short service presided over by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then after that MPs and peers will get the chance to process past the coffin. At 5 p.m, that's when the doors will be open to the public, and they won't close. It'll be open for 24 hours until 6:30 a.m. Next Monday morning, the day of the funeral.
And to those who want to go to Westminster Hall, what can they expect?
Well, the coffin will be placed on a raised platform, and it'll be covered in the royal standard. And then on top of it, you'll get to see the orb and sceptre, perhaps the most symbolic of the crown jewels. Queen Elizabeth II carried them on her coronation, and King Charles will carry them on his coronation too. So a really poignant marker of the passage of power from the Queen to her son.
And the big unknown is how many people will queue, because there is potentially much more interest than anticipated before.
Well, the government are warning people that they'll have to wait many, many hours, potentially even overnight, to get to the front of that queue. And that won't come as a surprise to anyone who, watched the coffin being transported from Balmoral to Edinburgh, or who was at Buckingham Palace this weekend, where it was very busy indeed. The original estimate is that around 40,000 people were thought to be coming, but that number could reach up to 1 million in total. We just don't know. What we do know is that it'll be a massive security operation. There are already cordons being put in place in Westminster, and we're being told that there'll be airport-style security. Now, we're still waiting for official confirmation of the route of the queue. We're told it could start as far away as Tower Bridge. Now, that's more than 3 miles away, so it gives you a sense of the challenge for authorities trying to both gauge and accommodate the strength of public feeling.
Amelia Jen. Well, as we reported earlier, King Charles is making his way to Edinburgh as more events and tributes take place today. Let's go to Matt, who's outside the Palace of Holyrood House. Matt.
Thanks, Krish. It's interesting what you asked Amelia there just now about the numbers turning up, and that they might be a lot greater than expected. Remember, when the Queen Mother lay in state in Westminster Hall in 2002, there were almost 200,000 people who went to see her, many, many more than the authorities had expected. And I think, judging from the scene here in Edinburgh, and I'm standing outside the Palace of Holyrood House, you can expect something similar. The crowds have already been building up all morning long. People will be staying there all day long as events proceed along the Royal Mile. I mean, hundreds of people, thousands of people. Yesterday we saw tens of thousands of people, even as the heavens opened. Luckily today, the sun has been called in, perhaps by royal decree, you never know. But here's what's going to happen for the rest of the day. Let me give you the run through. So, the King will arrive at the Palace of Holyrood House behind me this afternoon. In fact, I think he's supposed to be slightly early, and will take part in the ceremony of the Keys, when the monarch is welcomed to the ancient hereditary kingdom of Scotland by Edinburgh's Lord Provost. The King, Princess Anne and the Princes Andrew and Edward will then walk behind the Queen's coffin as it is conveyed to St Giles Cathedral. At 3 o'clock, there'll be a service of prayer and reflection. King Charles will then meet Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and the Scottish Parliament, also around the corner, will hear a motion of condolence. Later this evening, the King will join other royals for a vigil beside the Queen's coffin at the Cathedral of St Giles. So a lot of very emotional, poignant, ceremonial stuff happening here today in Edinburgh. As I said earlier, the crowds are quite remarkable. People have come from all over Scotland. Obviously, tourists are here also in their throngs, and people from all over the United Kingdom who want to use this first opportunity to try and see the Queen's coffin in the cathedral and pay their respects in public in a sort of public collective gathering. Here's what I heard from some of the people in the crowd this morning. The Royal Mile between the Palace of Holyrood House and Edinburgh Castle is the ceremonial artery of Scotland. The last time it saw crowds like this was for the so-called gathering in 2009, when the Scottish clans converge. This is a different kind of gathering. Respect and sorrow for the late Queen, respect and curiosity to see her son, the King, on his first visit to the Scottish capital as monarch.
Every time you see a photograph or a piece of news footage, it brings back your own memories. It's just a terribly.
Does it make you think of the losses that you've suffered as well? Personally?
Yes. Oh yes. Of course it does. Of course it does.
It brings home how the family will be feeling, because you've experienced that.
Politics has been suspended for the day in the throng, and yet it is never far from the surface here, and will pose a challenge to new government and monarch. It is the symbol, really, of the union of crowds, isn't it?
It is, but I think people held a lot more affection for the Queen than they might possibly do for the next monarch, I'll just say. Yes, I'm trying to be diplomatic.
It is such a significant thing for us Scots and us people of the United Kingdom to be here to say thank you to Her Gracious Majesty and also to be with the royal family.
King Charles will fill his mother's shoes for the people of Scotland?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think over the last few days, as we've seen him transition into this new role, we've seen a sense of majesty with purpose.
And as I said earlier, King Charles is slightly early. I think he's about 25 minutes early, in fact, so he should be arriving in Edinburgh at the airport and then here at the Palace of Holyrood House anytime soon. We've also got some breaking news. Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, has just announced that there will be a minute's silence for the nation, for the public, at 8 p.m. on Sunday, next Sunday, so the day before the funeral. She, by the way, is also due here in Edinburgh later today, but she's not travelling with King Charles. She's travelling by herself. But this is also her opportunity to travel around the country and to introduce herself 1 week into the job as the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. Although, of course, politics is suspended to a very large extent in this week of mourning and reverence and respect, politics never quite goes away completely.